Have you ever done everything just to make someone happy, only to be the one who ends up hurt? Kristen Quinn, 24, knows that feeling better than anyone. For 3 months, she poured every bit of her free time into planning her sister Addison's Sweet 16. From picking the perfect dress, designing the invitations, hiring a band, to creating a heartfelt video of their memories. Every detail carried love, trust, and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, her family could truly be together again. But Kristen had no idea. Behind all that excitement was a cruel secret waiting to break her heart. Watch until the end to see how, just 1 day later, Kristen's life changed completely. And to hear the powerful lesson that anyone who's ever been underestimated by their own family needs to know. On the day of the party, Kristen woke up early, her heart filled with excitement and nervous energy. She checked the guest list 3 times, texted the band to confirm, and made sure everything was perfect. The 3-tiered cake she had specially ordered for Addison, in her sister's favorite shade of purple, had just been delivered. In her mind, Kristen could already picture it. Addison walking in, smiling brightly, rushing over to hug her, whispering a heartfelt "thank you." Just that thought alone warmed her heart. She arrived at the venue an hour early. Everything looked beautiful. The balloons, the lights, the gift table neatly arranged with handwritten cards. Addison's friends began to arrive, chatting excitedly. But strangely, Addison herself wasn't there. Kristen called, no answer. She texted, sent photos, even asked her parents to tell Addison to hurry. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. The band started playing to keep the mood alive, but whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Maybe Addison got stuck in traffic. Or maybe she's planning a surprise for her sister. Kristen smiled nervously, trying to believe her sister would walk in any second. But when the clock struck 8 p.m., her heart began to pound. She called her mother. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered, cold and detached. "Why are you calling, Kristen?" "Mom, Addison hasn't arrived. Everyone's waiting. I just wanted to ask." Laughter and the sound of music echoed through the phone. Kristen froze. Then came her father's voice, calm, indifferent. "Oh, you didn't know. We're in Paris, Kristen. Addison's party isn't there. We just wanted to keep you busy." Time stop. Paris. They'd gone overseas. While she, the one who had spent her whole summer planning every detail, stood alone in an empty ballroom. A soft laugh slipped through the line before the call ended. Kristen stood motionless under the bright lights, her hands trembling. Addison's friends slowly realized something was wrong. Some left, some looked away awkwardly. The once lively room now felt cold and hollow, filled only with the faint sound of a song still playing in the background. Kristen forced a smile, thanked everyone for coming, apologized. And when the last door closed, her tears finally fell. Heavy, quiet, and full of truth. All her efforts had never mattered. Everything she had done, paying for her sister's tuition, helping her parents with bills, canceling her own trip to fund this party, meant nothing. To them, she was just a convenience. Joke. She looked around the empty hall. The cake still stood there with the words, "Happy Sweet 16 Addison," written in frosting. Kristen took out her phone and snapped a photo, not to remember but to never forget. Back home, the small apartment felt painfully silent. She sat on the couch and stared at an old family photo, everyone smiling while she stood slightly apart, trying to fit into a happiness that was never hers. That night she couldn't sleep. Her father's words replayed in her mind. "We just wanted to keep you busy." It wasn't just a sentence, it was a verdict. Proof that, to them, she was nothing. But in that pain, something inside Kristen began to awaken. She remembered every time they dismissed her, when her father mocked her art school dreams, when Addison called her boring and useless, when her mother said, "This family doesn't need another failure." For the first time, Kristen didn't cry. She quietly opened her laptop and began to write. The first line read, "The day my sister had the perfect birthday party, and I was the only one who showed up." She saved the file, then looked out the window. Streetlights glowed softly against the still night. Inside her chest, a new feeling stirred. Not anger but clarity. She realized she had spent too long chasing approval from people who never wanted to see her shine. And maybe the best thing she could do now was stop trying to make them happy. Because sometimes the deepest pain isn't what others do to us. It's realizing how much we've hurt ourselves by hoping they would change. Kristen closed her laptop, took a deep breath and whispered, "Enough. From now on, I'll live for me." She didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain. After that night of betrayal, Kristen Quinn would never be the same again. The next morning, as the pale sunlight slipped through the curtains, Kristen was still sitting at her desk, dark circles under her eyes after a sleepless night. Her laptop screen glowed softly, an unsent email open before her, the words blinking at the top. "I'm resigning effective today." She stared at it for a long time. 10 years at a small interior design shop. Always the first to arrive, the last to leave. She had once believed that if she worked hard enough, if she stayed patient, one day the world and her family would finally see her worth. But last night's betrayal had shattered that illusion. No one was going to change unless she did. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tara, the only real friend she had left. "I just saw your sister's story. She's showing off photos from Paris. Kristen, are you okay?" Kristen stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Shame, anger, disappointment, betrayal. All of it rushed back at once. But then she read the next line. "You deserve better. Go find where you truly belong." A tear slid down onto her keyboard. Tara didn't say much, but her words felt like a lifeline thrown into the darkness. Kristen remembered her dream at 18, to become a travel photographer. She used to borrow her dad's camera, capturing autumn skies and telling herself that one day, she'd tell stories through her lens. But then her father had laughed. "Photography isn't a real job. You need to do something useful." So she had folded that dream away, locked it deep inside her heart, and let the years pass by in quiet surrender. Now, as everything around her fell apart, Kristen realized something. Maybe this pain was the wake-up call she had been waiting for. She opened her browser and typed, "Portland Photography Course." It was the same one she'd looked up 2 years ago. There was still one spot left. Kristen took a deep breath and clicked register. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from finally doing something for herself. That afternoon, she stepped out into the chilly air. The wind was cold, but it felt strangely refreshing. She stopped by the bank. Her savings totaled only $3,000. Not much, but enough to start. She withdrew $500 for the first tuition payment and decided to use the rest for a one-way ticket to Portland. Back home, she began clearing out her apartment. Family photos, old Christmas cards, sticky notes that once said, "You make us proud," all went into a box. Not out of hatred, but out of a need to be free from her past. That evening Tara came over. The two of them sat quietly on the balcony, sipping coffee. "Are you sure about this?" Tara asked softly. "I've never been more sure," Kristen replied with a small smile. Tara nodded. "If you need a place to stay in Portland, my aunt has an empty apartment. She's a photographer too." Kristen froze for a second, a quiet realization washing over her. It was as if the universe was gently guiding her forward. "Thank you, Tara. Really." That night, Kristen wrote down her plan. Cancel her lease, sell her furniture, submit her resignation. Within 2 days, everything was set. Some would call her reckless, others foolish. But for the first time, she didn't care. 3 days later, Kristen stood at the airport, suitcase in hand. She looked at her phone. Hundreds of unread messages from her mother, father, and Addison. She didn't open any of them. Before boarding, she sent one final text. "I'm no longer seeking your approval. I'll build my own life." Then she powered off her phone. When the plane touched down in Portland, she felt as if the whole world had opened up before her. No judgmental stares, no mocking voices, just crisp air, quiet streets, and the promise of a new beginning. The first few weeks weren't easy. She worked morning shifts at a cafe, studied photography in the afternoons, and practiced editing late into the night. Some days she was so tired she fell asleep at her desk. But every time she held her camera, Kristen remembered why she started, so she'd never have to live someone else's life again. One evening, during a practical photography session, she captured a shot that made the entire class pause. A rainy street corner, a woman holding an umbrella, looking up toward the streetlights. The glow reflected across her face, equal parts lonely and strong. The instructor asked, "Who is she?" Kristen smiled softly. "She's me from yesterday." The room fell silent. In that moment, Kristen knew she had been reborn. The anger was gone. The betrayal, strangely, now felt like a gift. Cruel but necessary, because it had led her back to herself. Sometimes you have to lose everything to see who's truly worth keeping, and who's only meant to be left behind. She wrote that line in her new journal, then looked out at the glowing Portland skyline. For the first time in years, Kristen smiled, the real smile of a woman who was finally free. The next morning, after arriving in Portland, slipped through Kristen had begun to adjust to her new rhythm at her desk. She worked morning shifts at a small cafe, sleepless night, attended photography classes in the afternoon, glowed softly, and spent her evenings editing photos in the tiny upstairs room she rented from Aunt Ellen. "I'm resigning," she felt stronger, more confident. She stared at it for a long time. But 10 years at a small interior design shop. One afternoon, as she was developing photos in class, her phone began to vibrate that if she worked hard enough, if she stayed patient, dozens of messages poured in. One day the world, first from her mother, then would finally see her worth. Then a number she didn't recognize. But last night's betrayal had shattered that illusion. Of embezzling money. No one was going to change unless she did. The police would like to speak with you. A message from Tara, immediately. The only real friend she had left. She called back, saw your and a stern male voice answered. She's showing off photos from Paris. We received a report that you withdrew a large sum from the Quinn family's shared account at the before leaving Missouri. Her hands trembling. Could you come in to clarify anger, the matter? Disappointment, Kristen's betrayal. Voice trembled. All of it rushed back a shared account. But then she read the next line. To that. You deserve but better. The officer only replied, "Go find where you truly belong. It's best if you cooperate." A tear slid down onto her keyboard. We just want to confirm the facts. Tara didn't say much. After the call ended, her words felt like a lifeline sat in silence into the darkness. Kristen remembered her dream at 18, cruel enough to become a travel photographer. She used to borrow her dad's camera, came through from capturing her sister. Autumn skies. Did you really think you could walk away and we just let you go through her lens? Mom and Dad are furious. But then her father had laughed. You should come home before things get worse. Isn't a real job. No apology. You need to do something useful. Just threats and contempt. So she had folded that dream away. Kristen's hands shook with anger inside her heart, but she took a deep breath and let the years pass by. The old her would have cried. But now, not anymore. As everything around her fell apart, she finally understood. Kristen realized they wouldn't stop until she broke completely. Maybe this pain was the wake-up call she had been waiting to give them that satisfaction. She opened her browser and typed. The next morning, Kristen walked into the Portland police station carrying every piece of proof she had 2 years ago. Bank statements, there was tuition receipts, spot left. Flight tickets, Kristen took a deep breath and the officer reviewed them carefully before nodding. Not from fear, you withdrew but from finally doing something for herself. Quinn. That afternoon, she stepped out into the chilly exhaled shakily. The wind was cold, but it felt strangely refreshing. What can I do? She stopped by the bank. Your rights to file a defamation report. Only $3,000. I recommend documenting much, everything. But enough to start. As she stepped outside the station, $500 for the first tuition payment and decided to use the rest for a one-way ticket to Portland. She was no longer the silent girl who let her others control her story. Family photos, that night, Christmas she cards, opened her laptop and wrote a long email to her parents and Addison. All went into a line was cold not and out final. Of hatred. I've spoken out of with the police to be free from her past. I didn't steal anything. That evening, Tara but it came seems over. You're the ones the trying to destroy my quietly name. On the balcony. She attached sipping every coffee. Document, every Are you receipt, sure about this? And even an audio clip of the officer confirming her innocence. I've never been more sure. At the end, Kristen replied with a small smile. I used to beg for love. Tara nodded. I used to crave a word of approval in Portland, but not anymore. My aunt has an empty apartment. From today on, I'm no longer the daughter of the Quinn family. Kristen froze for a second and succeed. A quiet realization washing over her. She read it once more. It was as if the universe was gently guiding her forward. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear. That night, freedom. Kristen wrote 2 days later. Cancel her lease with a single message. Submit her resignation. Within 2 days, everything was set. Kristen smiled. Some would call her reckless. She didn't need anyone's belief anymore. But for the first time, she didn't care. Actions would speak 3 days later, she launched a personal blog called Suitcase in Hands. She looked at her phone. Began sharing her
Hundreds
story.
of unread messages
her journey of
from her
rediscovering
mother,
herself,
father,
and Addison.
photos of Portland's
She didn't
hidden corners,
open any of them.
and stories of the
Before
strangers
boarding,
she met
she
along the
sent
way.
one final
Her
text.
first post barely
I'm no
reached
longer
a few
seeking
dozen
your
views.
approval,
But 2
I'll
weeks
build
later,
my own life.
a local newspaper
Then she powered
featured
off
her
with
with
the
the
headline.
When the
She
plane
left her
touched down
family
in
to start
Portland,
over.
she
and
felt
found
as if the
light.
whole world
The
had
article
opened up
went
before her.
viral. No
Comments flooded
judgmental
in.
stares, no
People
mocking
sharing
voices,
their own stories of
just
being
crisp
hurt by
air,
those
quiet
closest to them.
streets, and the
Kristen
promise of a
read
new
each
beginning.
one, tears
The first
falling.
few weeks weren't
Not from
easy.
pain this time,
She
but
worked
from
morning
connection.
shifts at a cafe.
Soon after,
studied
she
photography
received an
in the
email
afternoons,
from a small travel
and
brand
practiced
inviting
editing
her to
late into the
collaborate
night
as a photographer.
Some days she was so
accepted.
tired she fell
That
asleep at her
project
desk.
became the first
But
step
every
of
time
her
she held
growing
her
photography
camera,
career.
Kristen remembered why
Meanwhile,
she
back
started.
in Missouri,
So she'd
the
never
Quinn
have to
family
live someone
faced the
else's
storm
life
they
again.
had created.
One evening,
Messages,
during a practical
posts,
photography
and Kristen's
session,
photos,
she captured a
especially
shot
the
that
one
made
of the
entire
untouched
class
birthday
pause.
cake.
A
Spread
rainy
across
street
social
corner,
media.
a woman holding an
Neighbors,
umbrella,
friends,
looking up
and
toward the
colleagues
streetlights.
began asking
The
questions.
glow reflected across her
parents
face.
lost their
Equal parts
reputation.
lonely and
Addison
strong.
lost her friends.
The instructor asked,
But Kristen didn't
"Who
feel
is she?"
triumph. Kristen
Only
smiled
peace.
softly.
One golden
She's
afternoon,
me
as
from
the sun
yesterday.
set over Portland,
The room fell
she
silent.
sat by the Willamette
In
River.
that moment,
watching
Kristen
the light
knew
ripple
she
across
had been
the water.
reborn.
She
The
whispered
anger was
softly
gone.
to herself.
The betrayal,
They once
strangely,
made me
now
believe
felt like
I
a
was
gift.
worthless,
Cruel,
but
they were the
necessary,
reason I learned
because
how
it
to
had led her
rise.
back to herself.
Without anyone's
Sometimes
permission.
you have to lose
The wind
everything
carried
to
the
see
scent
who's
of
truly
salt
worth
and lavender
keeping,
through the air.
and who's only meant
in that
to be
quiet
left
moment,
behind.
Kristen
She
knew
wrote
the truth.
that line in her new
The old
journal,
chapter had closed,
then looked out at
and
the
she was
glowing
finally
Portland
living in a
skyline.
new one.
For
A
the
life
first
she
time
was
in
writing
years, Kristen
entirely on her
smiled.
own. The real smile of a woman who was finally free.
The
3
next
weeks
morning,
after
sending
sending
pale
email
sunlight
that
cut
slipped
all
through
Kristen
Kristen
had
had
begun
begun
to
to
adjust
adjust
to her
Kristen
new living
thought
at her
everything
desk.
had finally
She worked
settled down.
morning
Under
shifts
her
at a
eyes,
small
she
cafe,
focused on work,
night,
attended
studied photography
photography
classes in the
and
afternoon,
began to see real
and spent
progress
her
in
evenings
evenings
editing
email
photos.
But just
in the
when
time
life
upstairs
started to
the
feel
words
brighter,
renting from
the
the
past
top.
came
I'm
knocking.
resigning,
She
one
felt
morning
stronger,
today,
she
more
was cleaning
confident.
tables
Stared
at
at
the
it for a
cafe.
long time.
Her
But 10
manager
years
never
at a
lasts
small
looking
interior
easy.
design shop.
One afternoon,
Kristen,
someone
someone
was
was
waiting
waiting
for
for you at
the
the
last
last
to leave. They
Her
said she
phone
had
began
begun
to
to
vibrate
vibrate
if
if
she
she
worked
worked hard enough.
Family,
Dozens of messages poured in.
One day the world,
Stepping out
and
from
her
her
mother,
family, then
her father,
Addison's
mother,
then
then
Addison's.
Addison's
But that
sitting
night's
there.
betrayal
Dressed
had shattered
neatly,
that they were about to negotiate.
No one was
from
going
their
to
family.
change
Their
unless
eyes
she
the police would
no
like to
war.
speak
Her phone
with
buzzed.
you. We need to
The
talk.
message from her father said coldly.
The only real
Kristen
friend
crossed
she
her
had
arms
left.
and
I
just
just
saw your
and a
sister's
stern
story
voice
answered.
She's showing
Her
off
mother
photos
spoke
from
from
her
her
report
that
that
you and
Kristen
are
large
you
sum
okay?
from the Quinn
You've
family
gone
shared
too
stared
far
at the
before
screen.
leaving
You've
Missouri.
embarrassed
This
Could you
family.
come in to
Shame,
post
anger,
anger,
photos,
disappointment,
everything's
Kristen's
shared
voice
online.
trembled. All of it rushed back at
shared
people
account,
talking about
but
us.
then
I
she
don't
read
do
the
Kristen
next
stayed
access to
silent.
that.
You deserve
She knew
better.
they didn't care
Go
about her
find
pain.
where you truly
Only
believe
it's
about
best
their
if you
reputation.
cooperate.
A tear slid down
Her
onto
father
her
leaned
keyboard.
to confirm the
Tara
fact.
didn't
And
say
worse,
much.
Addison
After
call
her
ended,
words
felt
felt
like
like
a
Kristen
lifeline.
sat
You
in
know it's
silence
a
for
family
hours.
heirloom.
Kristen
She
knew
knew
there
there
was
was
only
only
one
one
person
person
cruel
let
enough
out
to
a
become a
quiet,
travel
bitter
photographer.
laugh.
Where
She
is
used
the
to borrow
ring
her
her
dad's
text
camera
came
no
through
one knows.
from her
Capturing
sister.
autumn
You were the last
skies
one
when
to
tell
tell
herself
you
would
could
walk
walk
away, and
She
we
just
just
let
let
go
go
of
through her lens.
Mom and Dad are
But then her
furious.
father had
You
done
should
it.
come home
before
before
things
things
get
get
worse.
isn't a real
You've
job.
made enough
You
of a
need to
fool
do
of
something
yourself
useful.
already.
Just threats.
So she had
and
folded her
that
sister's
dream away.
Kristen's hand
Her
locked
voice
with
young
anger,
inside her
sharp.
heart.
But she took
You
a deep
know
breath.
what? Years
Addison,
passed the old her
for
was
24
quiet.
years. I
But
cannot
not
quiet
anymore.
just to
Everything
keep the
around
peace.
her fell
finally
apart.
understood.
But not today.
Kristen realized
They wouldn't
some
stop until
consequences
she
broke
maybe this
completely.
pain was the wake-up call
she
she
refused
waiting
to give
for.
them that
She
satisfaction.
opened her browser
The
and
next
opened a
morning,
folder labeled
Kristen
Proof.
walked into the Portland
Placed
police
it on the
station
table.
carrying
It was the
every
same
inside
she
she
was
was
looking
looking
at 2
shots
years
of
ago.
bank statements,
Text
tuition
messages,
receipts,
bank
flight
statements,
tickets,
and
Kristen took a
confirmations.
deep breath.
She hit
Then
the
clicked
officer
register.
reviewed
The voice
them
of a
carefully
police
before
officer
nodding.
came through,
Not
the
from
account
fear
you
and
withstood
strength
from
from
finally Miss
doing
Kristen
something for
Quinn is
herself.
completely
That afternoon,
no
she stepped
evidence
out
of
Kristen
Kristen
exhaled
shakily.
The
Her
wind
mother's
was cold,
face
but
keep
it spreading
strangely
lies. Her
refreshing.
father
froze.
froze.
She stopped
You're
by the
no
back
right
door to
to
file
file
mumbling
defamation
something under her breath.
I recommend
Kristen's
documents,
but enough to
but her
start.
words
As she
cut
stepped
deep.
outside the station,
$500
confirmed
for
that
first
wouldn't take
shifting,
and decided to
and
fear
the
that
rest
had
for
once
one
have a
ruled
photo
her
of
gone.
it still in the box.
She was no longer the
She
silent
began
girl
clearing
who
out
let
others'
others
control to the
control
police
family
again.
photos.
That night,
Christmas
she opened her
People
laptop
cafe
and wrote a
began to
long
notice.
email
You
to her
make us
parents.
proud.
Curious eyes
All
turned
the
into
opening
a
line
line
was cold,
not
not
out of
invited.
hatred.
I've
had
had
enough.
enough.
To be free
If you're
from
here
her
to
past,
accuse me
that
again,
evening,
save your
but it
came
seems
over.
you're the
You
ones
destroyed
trying
my
my reputation
quietly
quietly on the balcony,
She attached
every
every
document
twice.
Are you
sure
her
about
father's
this?
voice
And even an
trembled
audio clip
as
of
the officer
Are
confirming
you
threatening
I've never
us.
been more sure.
At the
No,
end,
Kristen
she
replied
replied with
I'm
a smile.
protecting
I used to beg
myself.
for
Tara
love.
nodded.
She grabbed her
to
bag
made
and
a
blazed
word
to
of
stay in
last
Portland.
time, but not
My
anymore.
aunt has an empty
From
lies.
today on,
I'll get a
I'm
lawyer.
no
She's a
longer the
photographer
daughter
too,
of
begging
begging
to be
Kristen
seen as
froze
for a
for a
second.
second.
Then she walked
quiet
away,
realization
leaving
she
them
read
in
it
a heavy
once more.
silence.
It was as if the universe
was
was
gently
back
guiding
Kristen's
forward.
hands were
Her heart was
Tara,
pounding, but
she
not
turned
in
on her
fear.
camera
That
and
night,
took a photo of herself
2 days
down her
later, red
Addison
eyes
her
tied
lies
with
sell her
furniture,
furniture,
submit her
you're
resignation.
pathetic.
She
No
no
one
one
will
believe
believe the
everything
moment
was
I
Kristen
chose myself.
Some would call her
She didn't
reckless.
need
became
any
one of the
belief
most shared
anymore.
images
But for
on
the
the
first
blog.
time,
Nothing
she didn't
underneath
actions
it.
would
3
Kristen
days
wrote a
later,
single
she launched
question
an
that stood on
personal
the
thousands
called
of
suitcase
through my
in
eyes.
hand. I used to think
She
love
loved her
meant
she began
enduring.
sharing her
Hundreds
story.
of times
Unread
her
messages
journey
from
to
love
discovering
yourself
herself
is
and
to walk
photos
away.
of Portland's
She did
hidden
never
open
again
any
let
of
anyone
stories
make
of
you
before
question
she
she
met
she
along
sent
the way.
one
The picture
final
went
her first
viral.
post barely
I'm no
reached
longer
2
just
dozen
her
views.
approval,
But
they
two
saw
weeks
someone
later
who had
had
risen
risen
after
after
being
being
torn
torn
down
down
by
by
her
her
own
with
family.
headline.
When
A
the
week
play
later,
touched
her
down,
Kristen
Kristen
received
received
an
an
email
email
she
from
felt as if
Art
the whole
magazine
world
inviting her
went
to join a
viral.
photo exhibition
No
called
judgmental
Women
stares,
Who
no
People
mocking
sharing their own
voices.
They wrote
Stories
just
that
her
hurt
story had
others
inspired
closest
thousands,
and
who
the
were
process
learning
of
to heal
each
when
one
family
tears
was
the first
falling.
few weeks
Tears
weren't
filled her
painless
eyes.
time.
She worked
from
morning
morning
from
shifts at a
pain,
cafe.
but soon
after,
studied
she
photography
received
in the
an email
afternoon.
from a small travel
And
brand
practiced
inviting her to
suffering led to
collaborate
loneliness.
as a photographer.
Some
It had
days she was
shaped
so
her
tired
into who
she
she
fell
was
asleep
meant
at her
project
desk.
became the
She
first
reflected
step
every
of her
time she
just
held
one
her
photography
camera.
career.
Kristen remembered
Meanwhile,
why
she
she
sat
tell
in
my
Missouri,
story.
so she'd
The
never
Quinn
had to
family
live
faced
through
images
images
they
not
had
through
created.
anger.
One evening,
As she
pressed
pressed
send,
photography
and Kristen
photos,
looked out
she
the
captured
window,
especially the
one
one
of
of
the
the
entire
untouched
class
birthday
in
cake.
that golden light.
Spread
She
across
felt
corner
something
media.
a woman
Deep
holding
inside
an
her
umbrella.
chest,
Looking up
she was
towards
no
the
longer
street
running
began
from her
asking
past.
the glow
questions.
reflected
She was
across her
facing
parents
it,
lost
and
their
walking forward
reputation.
lonely and
Addison
strong.
lost her
The
friends.
instructor
But
asked,
Kristen didn't
"Who
feel
is she?"
triumph.
Kristen
Only
smiled
peace.
softly.
One golden
"She's
afternoon,
me
as
from
the sun set
yesterday."
over Portland,
The room fell
she
silent.
sat by the Willamette
In
River.
that moment,
Watching
Kristen
the light
knew
ripple
she
across
had been
the water.
reborn.
She
The
whispered
anger was
softly
gone.
to herself.
The betrayal,
They once
strangely,
made me
now
believe
felt like
I
a
was
gift.
worthless,
Cruel,
but
but
they were the
necessary,
reason I learned
because
how
it
to
had led her
rise.
back to herself.
Without anyone's
Sometimes
permission.
you have to
The
lose
wind
everything to
carried the
see
scent
who's
of
truly
salt
worth
and lavender
keeping,
through the air.
and who's only meant
in that
to be
quiet
left
moment,
behind.
Kristen
She
knew
wrote
the truth.
that line in her new
The old
journal,
chapter had closed,
then looked out at
and
the
she was
glowing
finally
Portland
living in a new
skyline.
one.
For
A
the
life
first
she
time
was
in
writing
years,
entirely
Kristen
on her
smiled.
own, the real smile of a woman who was finally free. The Women Who Rise exhibition took place on a drizzly afternoon in downtown Portland. The space was small but warm and dignified, filled with photographs of women who had survived pain, betrayal, and heartbreaks that once seemed beyond repair. Kristen walked in, holding her old camera, the companion that had stayed with her through the loneliest chapters of her life. Her piece stood at the center of the room. The moment I chose myself. It was the photo she had taken of herself in the mirror, eyes tired yet unbroken. Beneath it was the caption she wrote that night. "When you have to choose between being loved and being yourself, choose yourself. Because real love never asks you to lose your worth." The crowd stood silently. A few women wiped their tears. Then a reporter approached her. "The story behind this photo. It feels very personal. Would you share it?" Kristen smiled softly, her voice calm but powerful. "It's the story of a girl who was rejected by her own family, blamed, accused, and cast out for telling the truth. But she chose to rise. Not for revenge, but to live honestly." The interview was published on a major art site 2 days later. Within hours it spread everywhere. People shared and commented, expressing how deeply they related to Kristen, the young woman who dared to stand against the manipulation of her own family. But something unexpected happened. Kristen's family read it too. That night her phone rang. It was her mother's number. "What have you done, Kristen? You've made the whole family look like monsters. Addison can't even show her face at school anymore." Kristen paused for a moment before answering quietly. "I only told the truth. I never mentioned any names, never made anything up." "But everyone knows who you're talking about," her mother snapped. Kristen closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She no longer felt anger, only a quiet sadness. "Mom, if my words made someone recognize themselves, maybe the problem isn't me." There was silence on the other end. Then her mother said bitterly, "You're not my daughter anymore." Kristen replied gently. You're right. I'm finally myself. She hung up, and for the first time instead of crying, she smiled. A week later, a television program called Faces of Courage invited her to appear in a special episode about people who heal from family wounds. Kristen hesitated but agreed. Not for fame, but because she knew thousands out there were still living in silence, just like she once had. During the recording, the host asked, "If you could say one thing to those who hurt you, what would it be?" Kristen looked straight into the camera, her voice steady. "I'd say, forgive you. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. I don't need your love anymore. I just need to stop hating myself." The studio fell silent. The host nodded, eyes glistening. The clip went up on YouTube days later, and within a week it reached millions of views. Thousands of comments poured in, stories of gratitude, healing, and courage. Many said Kristen's words gave them the strength to finally walk away from toxic relationships. As for her family, news broke that Addison had been caught plagiarizing and committing financial fraud at her entertainment company. Her parents tried to cover it up but failed. For the first time, they faced real consequences, not from Kristen, but from the very lies they had built their lives upon. One afternoon, Kristen received a handwritten letter. No return address. "You were right. I was wrong. I wish I could go back to that day and take back everything I said that hurt you. Addison." Kristen folded the letter gently and placed it beside a framed photo from the exhibition. She didn't know if she'd reply, but deep down she knew the storm had finally passed. She lifted her camera, pointed it toward the sunset sky, and whispered, "Thank you for leaving, Kristen. Because that's how you found yourself." Blick. A new photo was born. Peace after the storm. And this time the smile on her face carried no pain, only light, freedom, and quiet joy. The exhibition ended, but Kristen's story didn't. After her interview, thousands of messages poured in, from people who had once been belittled by their families, called ungrateful, or forced to choose between loyalty and self-respect. Kristen read every word, tears falling without knowing if they came from sadness or joy. She was no longer the girl her family abandoned, but someone who inspired others to rise from their pain. One early September morning, she returned to her old house, not to confront anyone, but to say a real goodbye. The house looked the same, but she was not. The wooden door, the white walls, the old pictures, all stood as witnesses to a chapter now closed. Kristen placed a small photo on the doorstep. "The moment I chose myself." She smiled softly and whispered, "I don't hold any anger anymore. I'm just thankful because without those wounds, I wouldn't be who I am today." She walked away lighter, as if she had finally set down the weight of her entire youth. On her blog, Kristen posted the final entry of her Family Shadows series. The opening lines made readers pause. "Not every family is a place where we are loved, but only when we face that pain do we truly understand what freedom means." In the post, she wrote about her journey, about the girl who once feared disappointing her parents, stayed silent when falsely accused, cried in the dark because no one would listen, and about the woman she became, who learned to say no, to walk away, to love herself enough not to need anyone's approval anymore. The post went viral, shared across dozens of forums. Hundreds of comments poured in. "I see myself in your story. Thank you for saying what so many of us are still too afraid to admit." Kristen replied humbly, "I was just someone who used to be scared, but I learned how to keep going. And if I could do it, you can too." That night, she stood on her apartment rooftop, wind brushing her hair as the city sparkled below. She thought about everything, the humiliation, the loneliness, and the moment she first lifted her camera to photograph herself. Each picture, each tear had become part of a journey she would never forget. Now, when she looked back, there was no bitterness, only gratitude, because she realized forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about accepting that the past no longer has power over you. She whispered, almost to her own heart, "I survived. And I grew." Months later,
Kristen opened her first workshop for people who had been hurt by their families, called Rebuild from Within. She didn't teach them to forget. She taught them to look at their wounds and turn them into strength. Each person who came carried their own story, and each one left believing they were worthy of love, even if no one else ever said it. During the last session, Kristen showed a photo, her hands resting over her heart. Below it, the words read, "You are enough, even if no one ever said it." The room fell silent. Few people cried. Kristen smiled gently and said, "I don't need anyone's approval anymore. And I hope you'll learn to approve of yourselves too, starting today." And now, as you're watching this, ask yourself, if you were Kristen, would you be brave enough to walk away, even if it meant leaving your own family behind? If one day you had to choose between being loved and being yourself, which would you choose? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story might be the strength someone else needs to hear. Sometimes what we lose isn't a family, but the invisible chains that kept us silent. And when we finally dare to break free, we find another kind of family, built on respect, love, and the light within our own hearts. Kristen Quinn, once the abandoned daughter, has become a symbol of rebirth. Her story isn't just about pain, but proof that no one has the right to define your worth except you. If you're watching this, remember, you are not alone. Even if the world turns its back, you still have the right to choose yourself. Stay until the end, because sometimes, a story like Kristen's is all it takes to remind us that every wound can bloom into something beautiful.